Imagine a world where the passion for football ignited a real-life war between nations. It sounds like a dramatic fictional plot, yet it happened. In 1969, two Central American countries, El Salvador and Honduras, engaged in a conflict born directly out of a World Cup qualifying series. This wasn't merely a backdrop, the matches themselves were the fuse that detonated decades of simmering tensions. It's a story of national pride pushed to its breaking point, of economic hardship, and of how the beautiful game can reflect, and sometimes exacerbate, the ugliest of human conflicts. The stakes were far higher than just a place in the World Cup. El Salvador, the smallest and most densely populated nation in Central America, shared a long and often contentious border with its larger, more sparsely populated neighbor, Honduras. By the mid-20th century, their relationship was already strained by a complex web of historical grievances and practical realities. Both countries, grappling with underdevelopment and political instability, looked to their national identity and, crucially, to the fervor of football, as a unifying force. But beneath the surface, the foundations of peace were cracking under immense demographic and economic pressures that had been building for decades. The primary underlying cause of the conflict was land. El Salvador, despite its small size, boasted one of the highest population densities in the Americas. With limited arable land and a deeply unequal distribution of wealth, many Salvadorans sought opportunities across the border in Honduras, which had vast, underutilized territories. By the 1960s, hundreds of thousands of Salvadoran immigrants, many of them undocumented, had settled in Honduras, farming land that Honduran nationals often considered their own. This mass migration created significant demographic and social challenges for Honduras, leading to growing resentment. Honduras, facing its own economic woes, began to implement an agrarian reform program in 1962. This policy aimed to redistribute land to Honduran peasants, and a key part of it involved reclaiming land occupied by undocumented Salvadoran immigrants. The evictions began in earnest by 1969, forcing thousands of Salvadorans to return to an already overcrowded and impoverished homeland. This created a humanitarian crisis and fueled a sense of profound injustice and anger among Salvadorans, intensifying the pre-existing tensions and setting the stage for a dangerous confrontation between the two governments. Against this volatile backdrop, football was not just a sport, it was an integral part of national identity and a potent emotional release for the working classes in both El Salvador and Honduras. Victories on the pitch brought immense national pride, while defeats could feel like a deep personal insult. The sport served as a cultural common ground, yet also a powerful symbol of rivalry. The stage was set for the 1970 FIFA World Cup qualifiers, where the two nations, brimming with both footballing talent and simmering grievances, were drawn to play each other in a two-legged playoff, with a third game if needed. For both El Salvador and Honduras, qualifying for the 1970 FIFA World Cup in Mexico was an extraordinary dream, a chance for their small nations to stand on the global stage. Their national teams were considered strong contenders within the CONCACAF region. The stakes were already high, amplified by the deep-seated political and economic disputes. This wasn't just about football, it was about national honor, a proxy battle for superiority in a region where such opportunities were rare. The draw for the qualifiers placed them directly against each other, setting up a confrontation that would transcend sport. The first match took place on June 8, 1969, in Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras. The atmosphere was nothing short of a pressure cooker. Salvadoran fans traveling to the game faced extreme intimidation and violence from Honduran mobs, who attacked cars, hotels, and buses. There were reports of property destruction and assaults on Salvadoran visitors. Honduras ultimately won the match 1-0. However, the victory was overshadowed by the deep animosity and the violent incidents that occurred before, during, and after the game, marking a chilling prelude to the true conflict. The aftermath of the first match brought immediate tragedy. Amelia Bolaños, an 18-year-old Salvadoran fan, took her own life after the Honduran victory, reportedly unable to bear the humiliation of her country's loss. Her funeral became a national event in El Salvador, televised and attended by thousands. She was hailed as a martyr, and her death further inflamed anti-Honduran sentiment. News reports and public rhetoric in El Salvador painted a picture of Honduran brutality, deepening the emotional wounds and galvanizing the nation in a dangerous wave of patriotic fury. Just 1 week later, on June 15, 1969, the second leg was played in San Salvador, El Salvador. The retaliation was swift and brutal. Honduran players and fans were terrorized from the moment they crossed the border. Their hotel was surrounded by an angry mob, and players reported windows shattering from rocks thrown by protesters. During the match, Honduran flags were burned, and the stadium atmosphere was electrifyingly hostile. El Salvador won decisively, 3-0, evening the series. But the violence inflicted on Honduran visitors mirrored the attacks in Tegucigalpa, signaling a dangerous cycle of revenge. The escalating violence surrounding the two football matches quickly spilled over into the diplomatic realm. Both governments recalled their ambassadors, effectively severing diplomatic relations. The media in both El Salvador and Honduras became powerful instruments of propaganda, sensationalizing events and demonizing the opposing nation. Newspapers ran inflammatory headlines, further stoking nationalistic fervor and hatred. What began as a sporting rivalry had now morphed into a full-blown political crisis, with each country viewing the other as an aggressor and an existential threat, and their leaders facing immense public pressure. As diplomatic ties dissolved, the situation for Salvadoran immigrants in Honduras became unbearable. Honduras began systematically expelling Salvadorans, many of whom had lived and worked there for decades, having built lives and families. These expulsions weren't isolated incidents, they became a mass exodus. Thousands of Salvadorans, dispossessed and often robbed, streamed across the border back into El Salvador, overwhelming its already strained resources. This sudden influx of refugees, many bearing tales of Honduran cruelty, served as further justification for El Salvador's escalating rhetoric and eventual military action. With the series tied, a third indecisive playoff match was scheduled for June 26, 1969, on neutral ground in Mexico City. The stakes were astronomical, not just for football, but for peace. Both teams arrived under heavy security, and the stadium was filled with armed guards and a palpable sense of dread. After a grueling 90 minutes and then extra time, El Salvador emerged victorious with a 3-2 win, securing their place in the 1970 World Cup. The final whistle, however, did not bring relief, but rather signaled the end of any remaining hope for a peaceful resolution to the deeper conflict. The football match was over, but the war was just beginning. Following their victory, El Salvador issued an ultimatum to Honduras, demanding immediate guarantees for the safety of its citizens still in Honduras and reparations for those who had been expelled. When no satisfactory response came, El Salvador took decisive action. On July 14, 1969, Salvadoran armed forces launched a full-scale invasion of Honduras. This was not a border skirmish but a coordinated military operation, marking the official start of what would become infamously known as the Football War. The conflict, lasting just over 4 days, earned its other name, the 100 Hours War. El Salvador, with a more modern and organized military, quickly pushed into Honduran territory, targeting military installations and infrastructure. However, Honduras possessed a superior air force, which proved crucial in slowing the Salvadoran advance and inflicting significant damage. Aerial combat took place, a rare sight in Central American conflicts. Despite its brevity, the war was brutal, resulting in thousands of casualties, mostly civilians, and widespread destruction in the border regions. As the war raged, the international community responded swiftly. The Organization of American States, or OAS, immediately convened and called for a ceasefire. Facing intense diplomatic pressure, particularly from the OAS and the United States, El Salvador eventually agreed to a ceasefire on July 18, 1969, just 4 days after its invasion. However, Salvadoran forces initially refused to withdraw from Honduran territory without guarantees regarding the safety of their citizens and compensation for their losses. The post-war negotiations would prove almost as challenging as the conflict itself. The immediate human cost of the football war was devastating. Estimates suggest that between 2,000 and 3,000 people, primarily civilians, lost their lives. Tens of thousands were displaced, and both economies suffered immense setbacks. The war further exacerbated the problems it was supposedly fought over. The flow of Salvadoran immigrants into Honduras ceased, and those who remained faced continued discrimination. While the fighting stopped, the border remained effectively closed, and relations between the two countries plunged into a deep freeze for more than a decade, leaving a lasting scar on the region. Despite the ceasefire, the path to a lasting peace was arduous. A formal peace treaty was only signed in 1980, 11 years after the war, ending the official state of hostility. However, border disputes continued, requiring the intervention of the International Court of Justice, ICJ. It wasn't until 1992 that the ICJ finally delivered a ruling on the disputed territories, leading to the full demarcation of the border. This long and drawn-out resolution underscores that while a football match may have lit the fuse, the underlying issues required decades of diplomacy and international arbitration to resolve. The football war stands as a stark historical anomaly, often misunderstood as a frivolous conflict over a sport. Yet, as we've explored, football was merely the catalyst, the spark that ignited a powder keg of pre-existing, deep-seated socio-economic issues. The real causes were land disputes driven by population pressure, economic disparities, mass migration, and intense nationalistic sentiments inflamed by opportunistic politicians and a sensationalist media. The matches simply provided a highly visible, emotionally charged arena where these underlying frustrations could violently manifest. The football war remains a unique and sobering chapter in global history, a powerful reminder of how potent national passions can become when intertwined with unresolved grievances and severe economic strain. It underscores the fragility of peace when political leaders exploit popular sentiment and economic pressures are left unaddressed. It serves as a cautionary tale that even the most cherished cultural activities, like football, can be manipulated and transformed into instruments of conflict when the underlying conditions for peace are neglected. The beautiful game, in this instance, became a symbol of bitter division and the unfortunate pretext for a deadly war.